In the vast, open heart of Eurasia, a great stage was set. Here, the endless grasslands of the Pontic-Caspian steppe stretched out like a golden sea. It was a land of harsh winds and boundless skies, a place where horizons seemed to go on forever. This was a world shaped by the horse and the bow, a place where nomadic peoples roamed, following their herds across the seasons. Mighty rivers carved their way through this landscape, great arteries of life and trade. The Volga, the Don, and the Dnieper flowed south, connecting the deep forests of the north with the warm waters of the Caspian and Black Seas. This was the crossroads of continents, a place where Europe met Asia. Upon this dramatic stage, a new power was about to emerge. The Khazars, a Turkic people, first appeared as a whisper on the winds of history. They were part of the great Western Turkic Khaganate, a sprawling empire that dominated the steppes for a time. But like all great empires of the plains, it was destined to fracture. As the central authority weakened, various tribes began to break away, each seeking to carve out its own destiny. The Khazars saw their moment. They were skilled horsemen and fierce warriors, perfectly adapted to this challenging world. The Khazars did not build their empire overnight. Their rise was a testament to their military skill and political cunning. In the chaotic aftermath of the Western Turkic Khaganate's collapse, they proved to be the most organized and formidable of the successor tribes. They quickly asserted control over the lower Volga and Don River basins, a strategic heartland that gave them command over the surrounding steppes. Their early years were marked by a series of decisive conflicts. The Khazar army was a classic steppe force, built around elite, heavily armored cavalry and vast numbers of light horse archers. They were masters of swift raids and tactical retreats, able to strike deep into enemy territory and vanish before a response could be mounted. But they were more than just raiders. They learned to build and besiege fortresses, a crucial skill that allowed them to control key strategic points in urban centers. They established a standing army, funded by the state's growing wealth, which gave them a professional edge over more loosely organized tribal confederations. But power on the steppe is not won by the sword alone. The Khazars were also shrewd politicians. They incorporated many of the peoples they conquered into their state, not as subjugated subjects but as vassals and allies. Various Turkic tribes, Finno-Ugric peoples of the forest zone, and early Slavic groups all fell under Khazar influence. These groups were required to pay tribute, often in the form of valuable goods like furs or grain, and to provide soldiers for the Khazar army. The Khagan, the supreme ruler, was seen as a sacred figure, appointed by the sky god Tengri to maintain order on earth. Below him was a powerful military commander, the Bek, who handled the day-to-day affairs of the state and led the army. At the heart of the Khazar Empire lay its magnificent capital, Artil. It was not just a city, it was the nerve center of a vast commercial network. Located on the lower Volga River, near its delta on the Caspian Sea, Artil was perfectly positioned to be a global hub. The river was a great liquid road, connecting the city to the forests of the north and via a short portage to the Don River and the Black Sea. To the east, the Caspian Sea opened up routes to Central Asia and Persia. Caravans could travel overland along the ancient Silk Road, bringing exotic goods from the distant east. The city itself was a wonder of its time, a bustling, cosmopolitan metropolis that astonished visitors. It was divided into three parts. The city was a sprawling collection of felt yurts, wooden houses, and brick buildings, reflecting the diverse origins of its inhabitants. The lifeblood of Artil, and indeed the entire Khaganate, was trade. The Khazars were the ultimate middlemen. They did not produce many goods themselves, but they controlled the routes through which all goods must pass. They imposed a 10% tax, a tithe, on all merchandise that traveled through their lands. Furs, honey, wax, and slaves came down the rivers from the Slavic and Finnic tribes of the north. Spices, silks, jewels, and fine metalwork arrived from the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. The Khazar authorities ensured the safety of these trade routes, making them a reliable and secure path for merchants. This control of commerce was the secret to Khazar power. The city of Artil became a symbol of this prosperity, a shining beacon of stability and order in a volatile world. The Khazar Khaganate did not exist in a vacuum. It rose in a world dominated by two superpowers, the Byzantine Empire to the west and the great Islamic Caliphate to the south. The Khazars found themselves in a precarious but powerful position, acting as a crucial buffer state between these two colossal rivals. Their survival and prosperity depended on a masterful game of diplomacy, a delicate balancing act that they played with remarkable skill for centuries. They were not merely pawns in the games of others, they were active players, shaping the geopolitical landscape through their alliances and conflicts. Their relationship with the Byzantine Empire was complex and often mutually beneficial. For Constantinople, the Khazars were a vital strategic ally. This alliance was cemented through royal marriages. On at least 2 occasions, Byzantine emperors took Khazar princesses as their brides, a clear sign of the high esteem in which the Khaganate was held. With the Islamic Caliphate, the relationship was far more adversarial, defined by a long and bloody series of conflicts known as the Arab-Khazar Wars. For nearly a century, the two empires fought for control of the Caucasus Mountains, the critical land bridge between the steppe and the Middle East. The Khazars fiercely resisted the northward expansion of Islam, launching devastating raids deep into Armenia and Persia. In doing so, they effectively halted the Caliphate's advance into Eastern Europe. Had the Khazars fallen, the path would have been open for Arab armies to sweep into the lands of the Slavs and beyond, potentially changing the course of European history forever. Beyond the two great empires, the Khazars also managed relations with a host of smaller peoples. They were the overlords of the early East Slavic tribes, including those who would later form the nucleus of Kievan Ruses. Their diplomatic network was as vital to their survival as their army, a testament to their understanding that in the great game of empires, alliances could be as powerful as swords. Perhaps the most remarkable and unique aspect of Khazar civilization was its religious landscape. In a world where rulers typically imposed their own faith upon their subjects, the Khazar Khaganate fostered an extraordinary degree of religious tolerance. For much of its history, the empire was a place where Christians, Muslims, and pagans could all practice their beliefs openly. The capital, Atil, had mosques, churches, and pagan shrines. The Khazar government even established a supreme court with judges appointed from each major faith. 2 for the Jews, 2 for the Muslims, 2 for the Christians, and 1 for the pagans, to ensure that all citizens were judged according to their own laws. This policy of tolerance was not just a matter of principle, it was a pragmatic choice. The Khaganate's power rested on its control of international trade routes, which brought merchants and travelers of many different faiths into their lands. By creating a climate of religious freedom, the Khazars made their empire an attractive and safe place for everyone to do business. The most astonishing event in the Khazars' religious history, however, was the conversion of its ruling elite to Judaism. Sometime around the 8th or 9th century, the Khagan, the Bek, and the Khazar nobility decided to adopt the Jewish faith. The exact reasons for this momentous decision remain a subject of debate among historians. According to one famous account, the Khagan invited representatives from Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to his court to debate the merits of their respective religions. He was so impressed by the arguments of the rabbi that he chose Judaism for his people. This story highlights a likely political motivation for the conversion. By choosing Judaism, the Khazars adopted a prestigious monotheistic faith without politically aligning themselves with either of their powerful neighbors, the Christian Byzantines or the Muslim Caliphate. It was a brilliant act of religious and political neutrality. It allowed them to assert their independence and carve out a unique identity on the world stage. While the conversion was primarily confined to the royal clan and the aristocracy, it had a profound impact on the empire's culture and self-image. The Khazars became known throughout the world as a Jewish kingdom, a strange and fascinating anomaly in the medieval landscape, a testament to their independent spirit and their unique path in history. For more than 2 centuries, from the mid-8th to the late 10th century, the Khazar Khaganate enjoyed its golden age. This period of stability and prosperity has been called the Pax Khazarica, or Khazar peace. Much like the Pax Romana of ancient Rome, this was a time when the overwhelming power of a single empire enforced order over a vast and previously chaotic region. The Khazars policed the great trade routes, suppressed piracy on the rivers, and kept the constant warfare of the nomadic tribes in check. During this era, the Khaganate reached the zenith of its power and influence. Its dominion stretched from the Aral Sea in the east to the Dnieper River in the west, and from the Caucasus Mountains in the south to the great forests of the north. Dozens of different peoples paid tribute to the Khagan in Attil. The wealth that flowed into the empire during the Pax Khazarica fueled a cultural blossoming. Khazar artisans, influenced by styles from Persia, Byzantium, and Central Asia, created beautiful metalwork, pottery, and jewelry. The capital, Atil, became a center of learning and scholarship, attracting intellectuals from across the known world. While much of Europe was mired in the so-called Dark Ages, the Khazar Khaganate was a beacon of cosmopolitanism and relative enlightenment. The state's policy of religious tolerance allowed for the free exchange of ideas, creating a dynamic intellectual environment that was rare for its time. This golden age was the culmination of everything the Khazars had built. Their military strength guaranteed security, their diplomatic skill maintained a delicate balance of power, and their control over trade provided the economic engine for it all. For a few precious centuries, they created a zone of stability in one of the world's most turbulent regions. They were the gatekeepers of Eastern Europe, the masters of the steppe, and the guardians of a peace that allowed a whole constellation of peoples, including the early Rusas and the Magyars, to develop and mature under their watchful and often profitable protection. No empire lasts forever, and even during its golden age, the foundations of the Khazar Khaganate were slowly beginning to erode. The world around them was changing, and new threats were gathering on the horizon like a storm. One of the most significant challenges came from the east, from the deep steppe itself. New waves of aggressive nomadic peoples, particularly the Pechenegs, began to press westward. The Pechenegs were fierce and unruly warriors who disrupted the traditional order of the grasslands. They displaced the Magyars, who had been Khazar allies, and began to raid Khazar territory directly, threatening the vital trade routes that were the lifeblood of the empire. At the same time, the Khazars faced growing pressure from a new and ambitious power to their north, the Kievan Rus. For centuries, the Khazars had been the dominant force in the region, collecting tribute from the East Slavic tribes. But these tribes were now being united under the leadership of Varangian, or Viking princes, who had established a powerful state centered in Kiev. These Rus's princes were aggressive and expansionist. They saw the Khazars not as distant overlords, but as direct rivals who controlled the lucrative trade routes down the Volga and Don rivers, routes that the Rus coveted for themselves. Internal problems also began to weaken the state from within. The vast wealth and stability of the Pax Khazarica may have led to a degree of complacency. The Khazar military, while still formidable, perhaps lost some of the edge that had defined it during the desperate struggles of the Arab-Khazar wars. There are hints of internal strife and political instability within the Khazar ruling class. An empire built on controlling the flow of trade is vulnerable when those trade patterns shift. As the Rusas grew stronger, and the Pechenegs made the steppes more dangerous, merchants began to seek alternative routes, diminishing the flow of revenue that the Khazar state depended on. The delicate diplomatic balance that the Khazars had maintained for so long also began to fall apart. The Byzantine Empire, once a staunch ally, began to see the rising power of Kievan Rus as a more useful partner in the region. The Khazars found themselves increasingly isolated. Their traditional allies were gone, and they were caught between the hammer of the Pechenegs on the steppe and the anvil of the ambitious Rus's princes on the rivers. The stage was set for a final, decisive conflict. The final blow to the Khazar Khaganate was delivered by a single, remarkable figure, Sviatoslav I, the warrior prince of Kiev. Sviatoslav was the embodiment of the new Rus power. He was described as a true Viking in spirit, a man who cared little for the comforts of his palace and lived the life of a soldier among his men. He saw the Khazar Empire as the primary obstacle to his ambitions. He wanted to control the entire river trade route from the Baltic to the Black Sea and beyond, and the Khazars stood squarely in his way. In the mid-1960s, he gathered his formidable army, the fierce Varangian warriors and their Slavic subjects, and launched a devastating campaign. Sviatoslav's campaign was a blitzkrieg, a lightning war that struck at the very heart of the Khazar Empire. Instead of a direct assault, he first moved east, subjugating Khazar tributaries along the Oka and Volga rivers, peeling away the empire's outer layers. Then, in or around the year 965, he sailed his army down the Volga and fell upon the great capital of Atil. The city, which had stood for centuries as a symbol of wealth and stability, was caught completely off guard. It was brutally sacked and burned to the ground. But Sviatoslav was not finished. He was determined to shatter the Khazar state completely. After destroying Atil, he marched his army across the steppe to the Don River Valley. There, he attacked and destroyed the great Khazar fortress of Sarkel, another key center of their power and control over the trade routes. In a few short years, Sviatoslav had systematically dismantled the entire structure of the Khazar Empire. The fall was swift and catastrophic. The central government collapsed, and the Khazar state fractured into smaller, leaderless groups. The empire that had dominated the steppes for 3 centuries, that had stood as an equal to Byzantium and the Caliphate, had vanished from the map with shocking speed, its great cities left to be swallowed by the earth. Though the Khazar Khaganate was utterly destroyed, its ghost continued to haunt the steppes of Eurasia. The legacy of this lost empire is subtle but profound, an echo that can still be heard in the history of the peoples who came after. One of their most significant contributions was the shield they provided for Eastern Europe for 300 years. By halting the advance of the Umayyad Caliphate in the Caucasus, the Khazars prevented the potential conquest of the Slavic lands. The fall of the Khazars directly led to the rise of Kievan Ruses as the dominant power in the region. The story of the Khazars' conversion to Judaism has also left a lasting and controversial legacy. For centuries, it has fueled speculation about the origins of Ashkenazi Jews in Eastern Europe. Ultimately, the story of the Khazars is a powerful reminder of how empires can vanish, leaving only whispers and archaeological traces behind. They were a people who created a unique, tolerant, and prosperous civilization in a harsh and unforgiving land. They mastered the art of survival between giants, built a world-class commercial hub, and made a religious choice unlike any other in history. Though their cities have returned to dust and their name is largely forgotten by the wider world, their empire played a crucial role in shaping the destinies of Russia, Ukraine, and the very map of Eastern Europe. They are the lost empire whose influence is still woven invisibly into the fabric of our modern world.